So I'm Taj Giesbrecht, and this is my wife Andrea. Back in 2012, we were at PBF's family camp down out at the Dunes Bible Camp on the Washington coast. I ended up breaking my neck. I went down a water slide and hit my head on the bottom of the pool. It was quite an ordeal. Yeah. But God was right there in the middle of every little detail of the whole thing. So.
One of the gifts that God gave us was not letting us know the seriousness of his injury right away. I think that if I had known how close he was to death, I couldn't have handled it. When he first came up out of the water, we knew there was a laceration on his head, and we thought he'd broken his arm. And that's where we went from there. It wasn't until we got to the first hospital that we realized there were fractures in his neck. But even then, the doctor there said, I think they're stable fractures, which was completely untrue. When we got to Portland was when we started realizing this is a really big deal. And it wasn't even until after the surgery, in talking to the surgeon, that we realized that everybody was shocked that he survived, first of all, and that he was not paralyzed. And I think God was gracious in not letting me know that all at once, because I don't think I could have handled that amount of stress, that amount of fear.
Yeah, it was obvious that before this happened, God had put everything in place to show his hand at work through the midst of it. Because when I got down to the bottom of the water slide, I knew I was hurt, but real close by there was a chiropractor, there was a nurse, and there's a couple other people who knew exactly what to do. Somebody was dabbing blood off the top of my head, and somebody else mentioned, hey, you might have a neck injury, and somebody who knows what they're talking about. So and 911 was called very quickly. Somebody had the right instincts to do that. Mm-hmm.
And my sister was able to hop in her car. She lives in Montesano, and she was able to get to the hospital in Portland before we even arrived. She was there and ready for us and waiting, and she was a huge support for me. This was the most terrifying thing I've ever been through, and she was right there supporting me, praying with us. So there was a lot that God orchestrated, which just showed us he was there. This was horrible, but he was there.
I remember some of my thoughts and feelings when I was laying on the backboard, that I had a sense that I was in God's hands, and I had no idea whether my life was going to be completely changed, whether I was going to be paralyzed. But it was clear to me that I was in God's hands, and that it was easy in that moment for me to submit to his will and to be comfortable that this is the Lord of the universe. My injuries are something that he can handle, and if he's going to do something with my physical abilities for the rest of my life, then that's what he has planned for me, and that's fine. It should be fine with me, and it was. That was quite a blessing that he gave me that faith to be able to walk through it that way.
So the doctor had told me that he would need to be doing 2 surgeries. He went in and did the first surgery, which was the major part of pulling all the pressure off the spinal cord, putting plates and screws in, and really saving his life. And when he came in to discuss how that went with me and the post-op imaging, he told me that he didn't need to do the second surgery. And we were pretty shocked by that. And he said he had no explanation for it, but everything, all the other fragmented pieces that he was going to fix in the second surgery had fallen into place exactly where they belonged. And he had no explanation. And I told him that I did. And he looked at me kind of crazy. And I said, he's got thousands of people praying for him. And he said, well, I don't know about that. Like, well, I do. But so he avoided the second surgery and recovered remarkably faster than anybody expected. We were only there for 6 days instead of the 2 weeks they'd originally scheduled us for.
So a couple days prior to going to family camp, we had finalized our decision to adopt a pair of boys from Ethiopia.
And we had been told by the agency when we asked them how quick the process would be, the lady said, we'd love to tell you that our Christian families, everything goes smoothly and really quickly, but we find just the opposite, and that we firmly believe that Satan does not want Christian families adopting. And so we see more roadblocks, oftentimes with Christian families. This was a big roadblock.
Yeah. There's a verse in the end of Genesis when Joseph is talking about his brothers having sold him into slavery. And the verse is something like, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And a lot of times when we're in the midst of something challenging, we can view it as meant for evil, but God does mean these things for good, for his greater good.
We've talked a lot about the verse in James in regards to this accident too, about consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. And it's not a if you face trials, it's when, and it's of many kinds, but that producing endurance in you, and the endurance producing character. And so that's kind of our view now on suffering, is what's the character that God wants to bring out of this for me, for us.
I've learned that it's never really helpful to consider comparing pain. Because how can you compare the pain of losing a loved one, or losing life opportunities that you planned on, or physical pain and suffering? There's not a really good way of comparing those, but God wants to meet each person in the pain and suffering that they're experiencing, and teach them and connect and relate and help them to grow and mature. Because those moments of pain and suffering are a tool that God uses to help us to grow and mature